When talking about contradictions, we've got to always bear in mind that there are mistakes, there are errors that may occur, and this is when your 1 equals 1.0001 sometimes may be an honest mistake. And this is what Ilyenkov acknowledges in the 5th chapter of the Dialectics of the Abstract and the Concrete in Karl Marx's Capital. And this is the area where we should tread cautiously, because in many areas where we are not experts, we may not be able to possess the knowledge in order to evaluate whether an honest mistake was made or this is the area where the contradictions lie. And Ilyenkov argues that the contradiction that is true, so to speak, is the contradiction that occurs naturally. It actually occurs in the objective reality, in the world that surrounds us. And it is not our mistaken perception, it is not our human error that creates the contradiction. And in order to do so, you have to be an expert in this area. And if not, then you have to acknowledge your limitations. And this is what I continuously do. This is why I always insist you go on and read the source material from which I'm deriving yourselves. Because again, I'm not an expert, I'm not a dialectician, or call it what you will. I'm not a professional philosopher. I am just a former school teacher who's now teaching as a freelance whoever, and I do not ever claim to be an expert in any of the areas. But what I do possess is the curiosity to get to know the truth, and I do see a lot of pragmatic reasons to study dialectics, because it has already enhanced my life to such a degree that I think that even if I don't get to live to see the revolution or socialism being built, I at least can utilize some of that knowledge to make my life just a tiny bit easier. And this is not what I'm advocating for. I'm advocating for us to organize on a large scale all over the world so that we can at least attempt to stop all of the oppression that will continue inevitably to happen, all of these preventable deaths, all of this loss of resources, loss of habitats, etc., that we are now facing, unfortunately. So, of course, my goals are always going to be to agitate, to make sure that people get to hear some of the other narratives about how communism is not the scary evil entity, and that it actually is not only a liberation ideology, it is actually a science. And the dialectical materialism is the scientific method of communism. But going back to contradictions, it is actually something that, just as I mentioned before, we should be very much self-aware of not possessing enough knowledge in some of the areas, but we also have to remain skeptical of some of the modern bourgeois, ideologically infused, so to speak, knowledge that is often provided. So this is where the simple questions that Lenin encouraged us to ask, who does this benefit, etc., should be asked continuously, because more often than not, some of the things are not researched purely because there is no profit in those areas of science. And these are the limitations of the modern science, mostly. And as lay people, there is not much we can do about it, but learning more, becoming a little bit more aware is always going to be helpful. And it is always going to be helpful to learn to speak about these without too much agitation, emotional agitation, etc. So what I find helpful is to make sure that we make a correct abstraction. This is what Ilyenkov also advocates for. He says that in order to actually find that contradiction where those crucial moments are going to lie, to advance our knowledge to the next level, we have to make the correct abstraction. We have to get rid of all of the details that are not pertinent to the subject at hand. And this is what I think is very difficult to do for a lot of us, especially nowadays when we're surrounded by so much information, some of it being misinformation or disinformation. It is so hard for us to get rid of all of the unnecessary details. But if we focus on the subject matter itself, if we think very honestly, what is the subject going to need to lose in order to stop being itself? Then this is going to help us create a correct abstraction. And this may take a while. This is not an exercise for an hour or a few. It is usually something that we'll have to dedicate time for. And more often than not, this area has already been studied. So we don't necessarily have to do a personal investigation. We can look through the material that already exists, the body of knowledge that humanity has accumulated, and this can really help us. So in order to start practicing that, I think it's very helpful to start doing that in your own area of expertise, whatever it is you do as your day job, or whatever your hobbies are. Your interests may lay in certain areas where you may already possess a degree of knowledge. And this is what Ilyenkov does when he provides an example from physics, where he talks about certain physical laws only being applicable in certain conditions. He talks about how the certain temperatures are only going to create certain effects in certain conditions, right? And it's not that the law stops existing and annihilates itself once the conditions change. It is just that there is a new law, the additional to the previous law. Either it's going to expand the law itself, or it is going to be a new law, but it's not like it completely eradicates the previous law. The previous law for those specific conditions is still true. And this is what we have to bear in mind, that there are no necessarily exceptions to the rule. It's just that there are rules that pertain certain movement, but then the conditions change and the movement changes accordingly. So this is what we should be able to do. We should see the subject matter that we're interested in learning more about in its movement. We should see that those little moments that are like snapshots of reality, they are never frozen in space and time. They continue to move as we speak, as we think of them, as we try and reflect them, as we write down our notes. Those material objects continue to move. So we should always account for that. And this is hard because we are taught from a very young age to adhere to some hard and fast rules. But in dialectics, that's just not the case. We have to be very, very flexible. We always have to adjust our thinking according to the material reality around us. And Ilyenkov argues it is easy to sometimes succumb to eclecticism. So this is why he advocates for Marxism, Leninism. So he advocates for some hard lines, some boundaries, some rules that are now known to the scientific world. And then he says, but we're going to learn more. We don't have to think that the world changes so fast, so abruptly, so chaotically that we are unable to perceive it, because that is just not the case. The way we perceive time, the way we perceive reality is allowing us for some time to make sense of it all. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me know what you think. I hope you have a great day today. Consider supporting me on Patreon. Do take care of yourself and your community first. Subscribe to me on all the other social media accounts, even though I don't do much there, and I'll talk to you sometime later.